Welcome to this discussion on teaching during COVID-19. I'm Dr. Linda Samek. I've just completed 7 years as provost at George Fox University, and I'm now a full-time faculty member in our Doctor of Education program. I served as chair of the CCCU's Commission for Chief Academic Officers for several years and as a commissioner for 2 terms. We're very grateful today for the CCCU and their hosting of this conversation. As part of the Council's mission to advance the cause of Christ-centered higher education and to help its institutions transform lives by faithfully relating scholarship and service to biblical truth, I would personally like to thank Morgan for her work in helping to design this conversation and her work in the background as our technical support today. This past spring, college and university faculty faced an unprecedented challenge in abruptly shifting from a typical in-person format to finishing out the academic year providing learning experiences through remote delivery. As the disruption from COVID-19 continues and increasingly looks to impact the upcoming academic year as well, we also recognize that what has been and will be happening throughout this year is going to impact our classrooms, our students, and our colleagues, possibly for years to come. So we have some questions that we want to address today. For example, how are CCCU faculty thinking about the present challenges and also considering the implications for the future? What are the areas of challenge and opportunity that you might see as a result of the pandemic? Those are some of the questions that we will answer today. Let me briefly introduce you to our panel. Dr. Anthony Bradley is a professor of religious studies and director of the Center for the Study of Human Flourishing at the King's College in New York City. In addition to his work at King's, Dr. Bradley is a research fellow at the Acton Institute. He has appeared on or had articles printed in a wide variety of news and broadcast media. Next, we have Professor Charles Reese, professor of theater and the artistic director at Bluefield College in Bluefield, Virginia. Professor Reese is also co-chair of Bluefield's theater department with his wife, Rebecca McCoy Reese. They have taught at Bluefield since 2001. They previously had founded 2 theater companies, one that specialized in taking stage adaptations of literature into public schools in Appalachia, and one called Regarding Creations that was a Christian drama ministry throughout the US. Next, we have Dr. Candace Wicks, an associate professor of biology at Hardin-Simmons University in Abilene, Texas. A cell and molecular biologist, Dr. Wicks completed a 4-year postdoctoral fellowship at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital prior to coming to Hardin-Simmons. She also serves as the pre-health professions advisor at the university. And finally, we have Dr. Theodore Williams, associate professor of communication at Bethel University in Mishawaka, Indiana. Dr. Williams is also a licensed and ordained minister, and he has a heart for young people, marriage, racial reconciliation, and social justice. We would like to start today by asking each of you some questions that are focused on your classroom experiences from the spring. And Dr. Bradley, I'm going to start with you. We noted already that you teach theology at the King's College, which is located in New York City, one of the earliest epicenters of the pandemic in the US. Could you briefly share what the spring looked like for you as a faculty member and for your students? And then what lessons are you reflecting on from that experience as you prepare for fall semester?
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for this opportunity to reflect for the entire CCCU community. I think it's really important for us to think about these issues specifically as Christians. I would say the one word to summarize our experience is crazy. It was an absolute circus of having to very quickly change our modality from on campus to online. And because New York was early on, the epicenter, we didn't have a lot of options to think about several stages of uploading. So we basically had about a week to sort of go completely online. It happened around our spring breaks that gave us a bit of a buffer. Now, we had a couple of advantages. One is that we were already structured so that regardless of your major, as a freshman, you could do the entire first year online. So we were already sort of moving toward a sort of 1+3 experience. So freshman classes, we're totally ready to onboard there. We're prepared now for freshmen to do the entire first year, regardless of your major, at home. So we're already there. It's the upperclassmen where we had some challenges. We have a really good modality system for that. And so it was really just a matter of taking where we were halfway in the semester and kind of tweaking the way that we did that delivery. It was really, really hard. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, you know, as all of us can attest to, students were stressed out. We were all stressed out. You know, 18 different websites had 20 different best practice principles, and you're trying to decide which ones to do. I think for me, I would say the biggest thing that stood out that I actually lament is that you could really see the disparity between the wealthy students and the lower income students. And that's where my heart really broke, because what I saw is that students that had great Wi-Fi access, that had great options in terms of hardware equipment, that had home lives that were very stable and well suited, they actually got the highest grades. Some of my more intelligent students, high performing students, really sharp students, actually performed poorly because they had so many distractions. And some of them didn't have good Wi-Fi connections. And we learned that some of our students didn't even have laptops, which I wasn't even aware of that. And some of them had laptops with no cameras on them and things like that. So the disparity between the high income families and the low income families was really made to bear. So in the future, in the fall, we're thinking about ways to sort of close the gap by making the delivery such that regardless of your capacity to have the best Wi-Fi and the best hardware, we can still have the best delivery opportunities for our students.
Very good. Thank you so much, Dr. Bradley. Dr. Wicks, I'm going to turn to you for the next question. As a biology professor, you teach in a field that has unique classroom needs, labs, experiments, and just generally much more hands-on. How did you and your colleagues manage a transition in the spring, and what are you thinking about for the new year?
Definitely have to piggyback off of what Dr. Bradley said. It was crazy. It was very chaotic, that transition in the spring. Like them, our transition, we had that week buffer of spring break. And then we basically had a week after that to transition all of our classes to an online delivery, which was very difficult for classes who don't have the special circumstances and situations that we see in the sciences. One of the things that was very beneficial and helpful for us is many of our resources quickly made a lot of their digital resources available online. A lot of the lab simulations were now available online. They allowed us to access them at either a discounted or no cost for the remainder of the spring semester. So a lot of those things, a lot of those accommodations allowed us to push forward and do that. And that's specifically within the biology department. So there were other avenues that a lot of my other faculty were able to utilize. They contacted a lot of our distributors, a lot of the companies that we work with our in-person labs, and they were able to provide kits that we were able to put together and send them off to the students so they can finish their labs, their dissections, their chemical experiments, their chemistry experiments. They were able to complete those things at home with those resources. However, we did run into the same the same issue. Now, we are a small private university, so we have not much of a disparity as, say, a public university would have, but we did see the disparities. We have a large disparity between our students who are from metropolitan areas versus the rural areas who don't have access to a stable internet connection. Again, different home lives. There are students who are responsible, if they're at home, they're responsible for working and helping bring in an income in that household, and they weren't able to focus and do well in those classes because of those situations. Also, the same situation we ran into with the hardware that they have, whether or not they have access to a computer that had all of the specifications that we needed for them to go forward and utilize online testing that we were using and utilize those different types of things. So even those lab simulations that we were able to use, if their students didn't have a compatible machine to access those simulations, that put them at a disadvantage. I had one particular student who was sharing a computer with their parent. So they weren't able to log into any synchronous Zoom schedules that we had or classes that we were having. They weren't able to do that if it was at the same time that their parent needed to access the computer. Some students were trying to complete the semester on their cell phone, which is very difficult to do when you're trying to do chemistry and biology and mathematics on a cell phone. It's very, very difficult. So we did run into those issues. And one of the ways that I think many institutions were able to accommodate for that, although it is a lack of them not being able to get the information that they needed or complete the coursework, we were able to try to level the playing field by offering students the opportunity to either opt in or opt out of doing a withdraw passing, a pass-fail grade for that particular course. So we then had to turn around and define those parameters. Well, what is passing? Is a C passing? Is a D passing? So those were some of the things that we had to look at on the back end in order to offer those options to the students, so academically they wouldn't suffer because of those disparities. So those were some of the challenges that we faced in the spring. Now moving forward, I will tell you that chaos and craziness, it does feed into innovation. So some of the things and some of the resources that we were able to access in the spring, we thought that maybe moving forward, these were good things to integrate into our classes anyway. One of the things that Hardin-Simmons is allowing us to do this fall, as much as we want to be face-to-face, they're allowing the faculty to decide how they want to offer their classes. So a class that was originally planned to be face-to-face, if the faculty feels more comfortable offering it in an online setting, then we have that option to offer it in an online setting or a hybrid setting. And so we have that academic freedom. So that is one thing that I'm very grateful about here at Hardin-Simmons, that they're allowing the faculty to feel comfortable as well, while trying to accommodate the students who want a face-to-face class or a hybrid class or would prefer a completely online class. So we have those options to try to accommodate all of our students. And so we're trying to utilize some of those same things that we did in the spring, putting together kits for biology labs and sending them to the students or allowing them to pick them up. One of the things that we're struggling with is how do you physically distance in a lab where where the main thing that you have to do is work in groups. And so one thing that we're trying to do is, if we can't physically distance our students, we're going to utilize some of those lab simulations, give them an opportunity to do those labs at home. The other thing that we're doing is splitting our labs. So a lab that's supposed to hold 24 students, we're going to have 12 students show up on one day, 12 students show up on another day, or split the times. So a third of the class would show up during the first hour, a third of the class would show up during the second hour, and then the last hour would be the last third of the class. So those are some of the accommodations that we're trying to work with for the fall semester as far as labs are concerned. And it is really a unique situation.
Thank you, Dr. Wicks. I love your comment about chaos leading to innovation. I think that's when the best of what we can do shows up for sure.
Absolutely.
And Yeah, and you and Dr. Bradley have certainly talked about some very similar experiences with your students, and we're going to follow up a little bit more on that toward the end of our conversation as well. So thank you for that. Professor Reese, I'm going to ask you the next question. You also teach in a very experiential field in theater. What happened for your classes in the spring, and what unique challenges did you and your colleagues face as you taught your students? And what are you considering as you prepare for the fall term?
One of the biggest challenges for us is that you have theater as an academic discipline, but then you also have theater as a performance discipline. And so a big part of what we do had to go away. I mean, we lost a show. One of our biggest productions of the season was canceled because we couldn't bring audiences together. Our acting classes faced unique challenges because there was no way to do the partner work they needed to do scenes. They had to shift to monologues, and it's just not the same experience. I think the biggest thing we're facing in the fall is that same idea of how do we find new solutions to these problems? And so, for instance, our fall production, we are looking at doing a radio show reenactment of Orson Welles' War of the World broadcast from 1938. For Christmas, we're looking at doing a live streamed readers theater of Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Another major challenge for us is we are teaching a profession that right now is on a hiatus. I've got friends and colleagues throughout the professional world who are writing and saying, we can't do what we do. And so it's a particular challenge in the performing arts for musicians and for theater artists and dancers. And so those challenges, I think, will be with us for at least the next couple of years as we try to cope with that.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, very challenging times. And you're right that there are so many facets to some of these issues and layers that we have to dig through as we think about where we're headed. So we appreciate your thought there. Dr. Williams, we're going to come to you now. I would imagine that there are people who would say that a field like communication might be well suited to online transition, given that we've learned how to communicate electronically even before the pandemic. But I think that everyone would agree that the past few months have really shown not just the strength and flexibility that online education can provide, but also some of the ways that communicating remotely can really fall short. What was your spring like, and what are you reflecting on as you prepare for fall?
Yes, first of all, I want to thank you once again for having me on, and great job thus far from my colleagues, some great answers. In terms from a communication standpoint, I think just in terms of our transition, we didn't have that spring break buffer that a lot of you spoke of. We have like one of the earliest spring breaks, it seems, in the nation. And so we were already back from spring break, and we were fighting, I think it seemed like fighting the urge to go online. But when we did make that decision, we had roughly a week also. And so we had a week where there was no classes. And so students could just take a break for a week. And as professors, we had to move all of our face-to-face online. I teach traditionally face-to-face, but I have taught online on the adult side. And so for a lot of us, it wasn't a very, very difficult transition, but I think just the fact that it was unexpected, and the fact that we had just got back from spring break. I think we had like a week and a half underneath our belts. And so it would have been better if we could have known ahead of time to transition over spring breaks. I think that was also difficult. And one thing I learned early on in online teaching was the key of just really connecting with the students. I love the face-to-face. I love the energy. I tell jokes. I'm very excited. I'm very personable. The first online class I taught, which was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, one of my professor evaluations, one particular student said that they felt like some kids who had been dropped off at a picnic. by their parents, and then their parents came back a week later or whatever. And I was like, yep, that's probably about what it was, you know? So it was like one of them things where I wasn't used to that modality. And from that semester on, I really began to develop opportunities to where they could always hear from me, always see me posting videos, checking in. And I think that's the key to online. We have lots of students, at least I had a lot of students this past semester. If you didn't stay connected with them, they would just float away. And unfortunately, I did have several students that even during the face-to-face, they were kind of just there. But at least there was an accountability because you could see them. Once we went online, I had at least probably about 3 or 4 students that I did not hear from at all. They basically just fell off the face of the earth for various reasons. And I think that was just tough for those individuals where that face-to-face was the only thing that was keeping them tied to the class. But what went well was the creativity, as Sister Candace talked about, Dr. Wicks talked about, as far as the innovation, you know, and we had a lot of people who were sharing best practices. Our administration was very cool. The key word for us was flexibility and grace. You know, they were going to extend flexibility and grace to us as professors, and we would also extend those to our students, and we would hope our students would extend those to us. And that really took the pressure off in terms of, we did away with the faculty evaluation for this one semester because it was just too difficult. We did away with some other things that took the pressure off and say, hey, just be a great steward. You know your students, you know your giftings, you know what needs to be done, just do the best that you can do. And so for me, it meant posting a lot of videos, taking advantage of Canvas more. Canvas is the operating system we use as far as posting up. And we have some professors who all they do is post the syllabus and say hello on Canvas. And we have those who got the modules. Well, this was an opportunity where the school was like, now we've been preaching, step your Canvas game up. And so that was the key, stepping the game up on Canvas in terms of just those points of connection. Now, as far as the fall, we will be doing face-to-face. And like I said, they retrofitted the classes for live streaming for students who don't feel comfortable or if a student gets quarantined. And we'll have shields. Everyone's required to have shields. And so I'm actually excited, a little bit nervous, interested to see how the fall turns out in terms of just no matter how you try to social distance, when you got that many students in one place, things can happen. But once again, grace, flexibility, and just keeping the main thing, which is how can we offer the best services to our students to honor them and honor God. And so I'm excited about the opportunities in the fall. And we've also been told to prepare some online stuff for the fall. That way, if come September, October, if the governor of Indiana says it's time to shut it back down, we won't be caught off guard this time. So I think we're approaching it with optimism, but we also have some plan Bs and Cs to make sure things turn out as best as they can under any circumstances.
Good, thank you, Dr. Williams. I so appreciate each one of you. And Dr. Williams, I especially thought it was good that you are thinking back and tying to experiences that you've had and really thinking about the quality of the education that you're providing to your students. So I'm going to follow up on that a little bit. I'll return to you in a minute, but I want to take a few minutes to think about implications for this disruption on the future of teaching in Christian higher education in particular. We know that probably all of you have heard from parents and students who have concerns about the quality of the education that they might be receiving when we're using primarily remote delivery. And I would like to hear what you say to students and parents who are very concerned about online and other forms of remote. What are some of the positive outcomes that you have seen? And you have all talked about some new opportunities, but I'm going to start with Dr. Wicks, and I'd like you to talk about some of the alternatives that you have used for experiments and the lab things, and how you're seeing the quality of the learning experiences for the students, and what you're hearing from students and possibly their parents about how they think about this.
Absolutely. I thank you for giving the opportunity to speak on that topic. One of the things that we do hear that quite a bit. Well, if I'm online, why do I need to come to Hardin-Simmons? I can go to a college that doesn't cost me as much and take the exact same class. Well, the thing that I tell the student as well as the parent is, yes, we're delivering the information online, but you're paying for the access to the elite faculty that we have here at Hardin-Simmons. That is who is delivering that course material. The relationship can still be maintained and developed in an online fashion. We make sure that we have access to our students and that our students can access us. One of the policies that we put in place with our online delivery for the fall specifically is, even though we're doing things remotely in some classes, we are required to respond to students' inquiries, or if they're reaching out to us, we need to respond to them in 24 hours. One of the things that we are still required to do is we're still required to hold office hours, even if that means you're doing virtual office hours. So I'm basically going to sit there in an open Zoom meeting waiting on my students to show up and ask me a question, just like I am in my office. So those are some of the connections that you will still get with us if you're here at Hardin-Simmons and doing an online class. You still get that delivery. You have access to new applications that you may not have used in a smaller or a community college, if you choose to go that route, or whatever other route that you choose to take. But these different applications that are novel and unique that you may not have used either in high school, or you may not use at a different institution who may be hiring an adjunct faculty to teach a course to keep their costs down. So that is going to be the difference, is that we're still the full-time faculty at Hardin-Simmons that is invested in our students, and that we're invested in how well they learn. We're invested in that they learn. We're invested in their futures. So that is one of the things that you will get. You still get that quality education, and that's why it's still worth still doing those online classes at Hardin-Simmons, or at their institution of choice. As far as what I'm seeing, one of the things that is essential with any teaching experience is you have to be open to the feedback that you get from students. So the simulations that I pulled out and I started to use in the spring, I didn't have much time to get feedback, but I'm using them online this summer and planning to use them in the fall. And I'm currently getting feedback from those students and say, Dr. Wicks, I really didn't like that simulation, or I didn't get anything out of it. And so what that tells me is that I need to create a pre-lab lecture that helps them focus in on the points that they need to be focused in on, so they don't get lost in terminology. So it helps me as an instructor to know what I need to focus in on and how to help them focus in on what they need to focus on. So it's all about communication. So as Dr. Williams said, having grace and flexibility is this, you have to have that with yourself, right? It's great that the university is giving that to us, and that we're hoping that we're getting it from the students, but we have to give that to ourselves as well, because without that, we can't grow and we can't get a better product for our students to make sure that they're getting the quality education that they need. So with that innovation, you also have to take the critique in order to continue to improve upon those new ideas that you're getting and that you're using.
Yes, thank you. Sounds like you've been thinking about that very carefully. I would love to open this up to the other three of you. Do you have a comment that you would like to make on the quality of the teaching that you believe happened in the spring, and how you are thinking about that for the fall, and how you might answer a student or a parent that says, we can't possibly be getting the same quality in this remote delivery as we were getting previously? What do you say to them? Dr. Bradley, let's go to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think what's important for every CCCU school is that this is an opportunity for us to actually sell our distinctives, right? So listen, every Christian college cares for its students. Every Christian, because they should be, because it's Christian. So that's what we're supposed to do, right? Every Christian college loves their students, but we come from different traditions. We come from different perspectives. We have different histories, and those are the things that people are actually paying for, right? And so we need to tell parents, at least at King's, we have a unique core curriculum. it's politics, philosophy, and economics. There are only a handful of universities in America that still do that, right? You can't go anywhere and get that. So you're getting something distinctive by doing that at King's with our faculty. Also with us, you're also doing this with a cohort of different kind of students, right? So it's not just the faculty, but you're actually learning in a community with different people who are feeding into, right, and co-contributing to your learning together, which is also important. I think the online delivery also allows us opportunities to be flexible with different learning styles, right? And so there are some students that I experience where they needed a lot of face-to-face, a lot of one-on-one, a lot of offset Zoom time, and others were like, leave me alone. I'm going to be a student at Oxford University. Let me go do my work, and I can come back and ladle in. And because of the flexibility, I was able to, and the whole institution was able to really appeal and sort of frame and deliver the education in a way that actually fit learning styles, which, by the way, is something the very large universities cannot do. So the smaller schools have the flexibility, I think, to really meet students where they're at in ways that other schools don't. I would actually say, this by way of advertising, I think in this environment, the CCCU product, you actually get more bang for your buck because of the ways in which we, as full-time faculty, are engaged in students that you won't get at larger state schools.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Bradley. That's really helpful to think about that. It was interesting to hear you talk about that first year that you had already moved online and thinking about how that feeds into the quality and the expectations of your students. That was great. Dr. Williams, would you like to follow up with that question a bit, since you originally talked about, quality of teaching and feedback from your students you had mentioned?
Yes. So for me, I think the beauty of being in the CCCU, as Dr. Bradley already alluded to, is this foundational, hopefully fundamental value that, that we're really trying to honor God in our teaching. And so in terms of how does this disruption impact the quality, I'm working under the premise that the disruption does impact the quality in terms of it should make it better. I'm a firm believer that God uses all things for the good of his people. And as a professor and a pastor, I've been preaching and speaking that maybe the disruption was because the quality had suffered, in terms of the complacency that sets in. When you think about long-standing institutions, whether it's in academia or in the church, we have a tendency to get comfortable with what we know, what we do, how we do things. And every now and then, God has to shake things up because we can go on autopilot. As a professor, we have certain measurements, certain evaluations, but I think there needs to be a self check that we do also in terms of making sure we don't grow stagnant in our teaching. And so for a lot of us, I know from hearing from a lot of my colleagues, that was important in terms of it shocked us out of the malaise. It shocked us out of the mundane, out of the slumber we were in terms of, wow, I had gotten so used to teaching the same courses. I know how I'm going to do it. I know on this day I'm going to tell this joke. They're going to laugh. I'm going to follow with this. All of a sudden, we're on a stone line, and we're like, oh, what do we do? Well, we teach. We earn our money. And now we have to reach the ones that are difficult to reach, and that's important. So I think the disruption, if anything, is going to spur the quality to another level in terms of having individuals having to go back to the drawing board to really think about what is the best way to get this information to our students. So I would say that as number one. And number two, a lot of our students, they live online. they live on social media, they live on their cell phones, they live on their laptops. So for them, it probably wasn't as big of a transition as it was for us. You know, they're like, finally, welcome to my world. You know, now you're on my home turf. And we be on Zoom or on a different platform. They like, hey, by the way, Professor Williams, do this. Here's how you should be doing it. Oh, okay, I'm looking for stuff. They're like, go here, go here. So it was an awesome opportunity for us teachers to become students. And that interaction became genuine because all of a sudden now they felt more empowered because in some ways they were the experts. And it was a give and take. And so I think there's lots of pros to this particular transition in terms of the quality of making sure that we connect with our students. So yes, there are some downfalls, some disadvantages, but I think the quality will not suffer if all those involved are committed. And I think that's most important. Regardless of the modality, if people aren't committed, it could be the best and it still will suffer. But if people are committed, no matter what you're working with, I think it'll be all right.
Good, thank you. Professor Reese, do you want to weigh in on that question?
I would echo what Dr. Williams said about this idea of being shocked out of our complacency. I would say, though, I think there's also a degree of complacency that happens with students sometimes. I think students often view college education as a passive thing. I come in, I go to the places you tell me to go for 4 years, you give me a degree. And I think what this has challenged all of us to do is to take a greater ownership of the educational process. I've got to make sure I'm communicating with each one of my students, but they've got to be as involved, making sure that they are taking ownership of their own responsibility in their education. I had my theater majors in courses, and they pretty much stayed involved. But then the students who I had gen ed courses with, that's where I think others have mentioned, I had students who dropped off the face of the earth. They disappeared because it wasn't something they took ownership of. They were relying on that passivity. I will spoon feed this course to you. And it doesn't happen that way anymore once we get into this modality.
Thank you. And we have one last big question that I want to get to. All of you in one way or another talked about accessibility. And we've heard and experienced the reality that our students, many of them don't have access to internet streaming, at least at the quality required for some of the things that we asked them to do last spring. So in light of some of the conversations that have come up due to COVID around disparities and unequal access to a whole variety of things from nutrition to healthcare to educational opportunities, and particularly in light of some of the things that have come out related to the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others. And then given the fact that a number of the people who will be listening or reading about this conversation are senior cabinet leaders and other decision makers on campus, what would you have to say to them about accessibility for students? What have you been hearing? What do campuses need to do to make sure that a Christian higher education is accessible to anyone who wants to take advantage of that? Who would like to be first to address that?
I'll respond.
Professor Reese, go ahead.
I think one of the biggest issues is infrastructure. I do a lot of traveling around the world, and it shocks me that countries that we would think of as not as advanced perhaps as we might see ourselves, but they have a much greater infrastructure for the internet, for computer accessibility. We have got to enter the 21st century. We have to invest both as schools, but as far as a nation in making sure that we can communicate on the same level as the rest of our neighbors in the world.
Thank you. Dr. Bradley, I think you were going to jump in on that one as well.
We've already been talking about flexibility. I think that's going to be key, flexibility and grace, as was mentioned earlier. And I think for those of us who are professors who sort of see our classrooms as these sort of classic spaces where we deliver the most amazing content ever, we're going to have to be flexible, because the ways in which that content is delivered will be received by people in different stages and different places. So we actually have to, I would say, sort of chill out and be more open to the fact that for some students, we have to be more flexible and extend more grace in terms of allowing the students to get assignments in, maybe even allowing them to take tests at different times than normal, expanding the ways in which we actually deliver that content. Because the other dimension that I would really encourage administrators to think about is the mental health disparity, right? That's actually as massively important as the other ones. There are some students, this is Generation Z, okay? The most stressed out, anxious generation, college cohort we've had, as some would say, in American history. And I had some students who one student told me he was so zoomed out, he was actually experiencing depression from having to engage his platform, right? And so that's an additional variable that administrators and those who work in student success are going to have to work with faculty and students with, sort of managing the mental health component of being isolated and engaging this platform, because it's in some respects how God did not design us to engage with other human persons. And so that mental health component for me is really important. And that's what I would really encourage administrators and faculty members to sort of graciously be flexible, because our students in many cases are struggling in ways that they actually won't communicate to us.
Thank you. I think that we all discovered that Zoom fatigue is a real thing, and it's difficult to try to maintain relationships virtually, for sure. Dr. Wicks, I'm going to ask you also to address the accessibility, because you particularly mentioned this with the size of some of the things that you ask students to approach.
Absolutely. So I think this is a question with a lot of different arms going out. But I first want to address the social aspect of things. First off, the social problems that we have experienced on campus, or have been present on campus, and we may not have experienced or known about it, they're amplified when we move to an online platform, because those disparities become very apparent. And so the first thing is that we have to make sure that our students are comfortable enough to open their mouths and let us know that they don't have access to certain things. And so when we quickly move to an online delivery modality, the issue is, if they weren't comfortable on campus, they're definitely not comfortable telling us that they're lacking something through a screen. They're not able to tell us they don't want to send that email. We can't get our students to answer emails anyway. So moving to an online platform just made it completely worse, and it isolated those students even more who already felt isolated, because they may have been different, because they may have come from a different background, because they may be from a rural place instead of a metropolitan place. So basically we took this problem that we wanted to keep in a little bubble, and we basically just blew it up. And now we're having to not only address those disparities, but we're also having to get to the root of the problem and say, okay, we need to address these, but we also need to make sure that if you experience problems going forward, that you're comfortable enough coming to us and telling us, so we can help you alleviate these issues and these problems, or at least be able to meet you where we are and meet you where you are and give you those accommodations to make sure that you have the ability to be just as successful as the student who doesn't have these disparities. So I do want to address that point going forward. We take a lot of things for granted, and that became very apparent when we had to switch to things online. We assumed that all of our students had the equipment that they needed. We assumed that our students had access to internet and Wi-Fi. We assume that these students are coming from places where their home life is stable and everything is normal, so to speak. We made these assumptions, so when we sent these students home and said, hey, you don't need to be on campus, but we're gonna still make sure that you have the same level of education, we set some of our students up to fail when we did that, because we took a lot of these things for granted. So I think one of the things that the admins and the higher ups need to know is that we need to make sure that when our students enroll, that they have different opportunities to satisfy some of those requirements that we're asking of them, and at different price points. We may ask students to make sure that you have a computer that has these certain specifications. And if a student wants to come in and buy an Apple computer and they can afford an Apple computer, great. However, if they can't afford the Apple computer, we need to give them different options that better suit their price point, to be able to fulfill those requirements that we're asking them to have, and give them an opportunity to different ways of paying that off, so they don't have to go into student debt further into student debt in order to meet those specifications that we're trying to get to them. So we need to make sure that we have our students, that they know upfront what's required of them, what they need in order to succeed, and we need to give them multiple opportunities, different avenues to meet those specifications. So I think that's definitely something, that a message that I would like the higher ups to know about, is that we can't take these things for granted. We need to give our students options, and we need to make sure that our students have a safe space where they can actually express the things that they need to express, so we can meet them where they are.
Excellent advice. Thanks to each of you. We have one last question that I would like each of you to answer. It's been a hard year. It's been a very busy year. We talked about chaos a little bit, and it looks like things are not going to be slowing down any this fall. I think we're going to be seeing more of the same. But knowing who you are and where you teach, what is giving you hope and energy at this moment in time? If each of you could share what those things are, that would be wonderful. And Professor Reese, let's start with you.
I think the thing that I'm looking forward to the most is being back with my students. I mean, in the theater, we are a very, very hands-on, communal kind of people. And I had that family kind of yanked away from me with no warning. And so seniors that I didn't get to see graduate, freshmen who I haven't been able to spend time with, I'm looking forward to the chance to be back in a classroom, even if it's with a mask between us and a glass partition. At least we're in the same room. So I think that's what I'm looking forward to, where my energy is right now.
Good, thank you. Dr. Williams, how about you?
For me, I think what most energizes me is the fact that I think I have taken advantage of the last 4.5, 5 months, or how long it's been, to allow God to work on me in terms of what needed to take place during this time. So I was not one of those individuals where I couldn't wait to get back to normal. I can't wait to get back to this. One thing God was telling me is we're not going back. There was not, the plan was never to go back to that. So there's a new thing that I think God is trying to do. He's trying to keep us all dependent upon him and keep us from growing complacent. And so I'm energized by the fact that while we were away, I took advantage of being away. I wasn't thinking about there, and so I'm fully rested. I'm fully invested. I'm excited because I was able to, in the midst of this stay-at-home time, to actually stay at home. My mind wasn't there. It wasn't over there. My mind was where it needed to be in terms of focusing on my marriage and focusing on family and eating right and preparing. And so I'm excited about that. And I'm also excited just the synergy that takes place when you're able to get around like-minded people, whether it's colleagues or students, in terms of just that face-to-face energy. And I'm excited just to be able to see, hopefully, the growth of all of us when we reconvene to see what God has been doing in all of our lives. That's what excites me.
Thank you. It sounds like you took advantage of what faculty are supposed to do during sabbatical.
Yes.
It was a bit of an odd sabbatical. Thank you for that. Dr. Bradley, would you share next what brings you hope and energy?
Yes, this has been an exciting time, as Professor Williams said earlier, for innovation. Innovation, 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 innovation. It sort of reminds me of the Old Testament narrative as God's people came out of captivity, came out of the Red Sea. They had a new world, and they had to pivot right on the spot and reorganize everything. And I think this is an opportunity for us to actually be creative. And to innovate and to do new things and take some risks and to try out some new things. I think it's wonderful because it's forcing us to do that. And if we're honest, in Christian higher ed, if we don't innovate, we're done, right? We don't have the margins of big state universities. We don't have the endowments of the Ivy League. So for us, it's innovate or close. So this is an opportunity for us to figure out ways to be sustainable and to maintain and increase our enrollments as we compete against each other for students. I love y'all, but sometimes, you know what I'm saying? I love you. I do. My heart. I love you. I love everybody, but not in the summer and probably till end of September. After that, it's all hugs. But until that point, I think you know we have this thing at King's that our students are sort of good, brave, and ready, right? And so I think the other thing that really gives me hope is that Generation Z, given the world they were born into after 9/11, given the fact that they withstood the financial crisis 2008, and now they had the election 2016, and now this. I mean, this generation could be the most resilient generation we've had in decades. So I'm excited because they're all hands on deck because they want to make this work. And so as students sort of dig down deep in their own courage and their own readiness and their own flexibility, I think our innovation and their flexibility could create something quite extraordinary in the future.
What an opportunity. Could be really an amazing thing. Thank you. And Dr. Wicks, would you wrap up with what's bringing you hope and energy?
Absolutely. I think Dr. Bradley was peeking at my notes over here. At the very top of my page, I have the big word resilience, right? I think that is going to be the big banner after all of this is simply resilience. You know, the thing that gives me hope and gives me energy is that because we've had to change, because we had to adopt different things, it's giving us the opportunity to evolve and to possibly reach more students because we are online. We don't have to just reach the students who can come to us. We can reach out and we can go as far as the interwebs would take us. So I think that is one of the things that gives me hope and gives me energy to say, hey, if we can teach this class online, then that's something else that we can build into our major and build into our minor, and we can offer it to the masses. So that's definitely one of those things that we're able to do to evolve and to reach more students. And just that innovation that we're able to reach. We're able to improve our faculty who had become complacent and didn't want to take the time out to learn Canvas. And now they're forced to learn Canvas because without it, they can't teach their classes. So I think it's allowing us to better as a faculty and as individual instructors and as people because it keeps pushing us to move forward. So I think that that's the other thing. And we're also stretching our students. They're in such an uncomfortable place. And I absolutely love it because I know that on the other side of that, they're going to say, hey, I went through this, I'm resilient, I'm able to conquer whatever you throw at me next. It's going to build confidence in them. It's going to give them the opportunity to innovate in the future. It's going to give them the hope and the energy that's now coursing through our veins and that we're excited about and we're praising God about. I think that energy is going to get passed along to our students, and what they're going to experience because of this resiliency is going to be fantastically and amazing for the kingdom.
Thank you. And we appreciate so much each one of you for thinking deeply about this, for thinking about the opportunities that we have as faculty at Christian colleges and universities. And we so appreciate that you took this hour today to speak to your colleagues and your supervisors and administrators and help to advance the work that we do in Christian higher ed. So thank you.